Ariel Elia. So moving on to the production aspect. Production refers to the technological advancements that have had an effect on the way fashion objects are constructed and produced. The Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries brought about innovations in textile manufacturing that included the introduction of the jacquard loom and the sewing machine. The jacquard loom alone was 10 times faster than hand weaving. Introduced in 1801, the jacquard loom allowed for up to 10,000 punch cards to be programmed at once. The punch cards holding the coding for the intricate and the complex patterns. Similar to the jacquard loom, a computer is set up on a binary system. So with a punch card, you either punch a hole or you don't, and with a computer, you either code it with a 0 or a 1. So computerizing the jacquard loom came as a natural transition. Issey Miyake was experimenting with coding textile patterns and with computerized jacquard looms, and here you can see his accomplishment in this ombre textile, and this is from 1986, so pretty early for using the computerized jacquard loom. The introduction of the sewing machine in 1846 allowed for dressmakers to quickly stitch long seams, while more delicate details were reserved for hand stitching. So what we did is, within the exhibition, we actually had a video that had highlighted some of these different parts. And here you can see the different parts that were reserved for machine stitching, such as the collar or the bone casing. And then you can also see the parts that were reserved for the hand stitching, the delicate details, such as the buttonholes or the buttons. The oldest piece within the exhibition is, oh, sorry, one last part I forgot to include, it was really important too to highlight some of these details, especially because it's a common misconception that in haute couture houses that a couture garment is made completely by hand. Ever since the House of Worth, they were always using sewing machines very similar to dressmakers in constructing and seaming together very long seams, and then reserving things like beading and embroidery for hand sewing. So the oldest piece within the exhibition is this man's jacket and waistcoat. It's from 1780 to 1800. And by the early 18th century, more than 2,000 mechanized knitting machines were being used, and they were referred to as stocking frames. And they were used to create luxury goods in England. This was a significant step toward the mechanization of the textile industry during the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. And with knit textiles, it allows for a closer fit as opposed to woven materials. So then moving into the mid-20th century, Missoni was a company who had really updated the textile industry. Unlike traditional knitting machines that only produce stripes, Missoni decided to implement the Rochelle machine that could create zigzags. Along with their space-dyeing technique, they were able to produce very dynamic colors, and Diana Vreeland, the very famous Vogue editor, was a huge fan of the Missoni, and she had quoted in an article, she said, "Look, we don't know, now we'd only, look, who says that there only colors exist? There are also tones." In Perenza Schooler's latest collection, they had used a computer to program and punch very fine hairs into leather until the leather was very, very supple and actually created a soft knit. In 1968, Cardin had used his own synthetic using Dynel and entitled it Cardine. To create this seamless dress, he used a heat process rather than a needle and thread to permanently mold the 3D shapes, sometimes referred to as egg cartons. In the 1980s, Issey Miyake began collaborating with Japanese textile designer Junichi Rai to introduce a new generation of textiles to the fashion industry. The pleats in this jumpsuit and tunic were created through heat setting, but it was heat setting with a linen fabric as opposed to a synthetic. Pleating is a common theme that Issey Miyake continues to use, and in 1993, he introduced his Pleats Please collection, where he utilized a complete polyester material. Yoshiki Hishinuma's garments can be seen as textile experiments. In this piece, he has actually taken small pieces of polyurethane and shrunk them through a heat process, really creating these wonderful exaggerated points that are somewhat look to be either an oil slick or even can be seen as plastic trash bags. Within the past year, the subject of 3D printing has become a very, very hot topic, much discussed. Some look at 3D printing, and even within the exhibition, and they'll look at it and say, that's not a real textile, and they'll ask, where's the structure? How do you produce that? The museum at FIT became the first museum to acquire a 3D printed textile in 2003. And the process of creating a 3D printed piece begins with creating the design using CAD, and that CAD file is then sent to the 3D printer. And there's a variety of ways to actually 3D print a piece, but the most dynamic is the laser sintering process of which this dress was created. In one step, the laser bonds and cuts nylon powders layer by layer, resulting in a seamless, non-woven object. The Freedom of Creation dress eliminates the amount of work it would take to handcraft chainmail. And if you could just imagine Paco Rabanne creating all those wonderful, fabulous dresses using all those jump rings and actually constructing those by hand. So these printers can be used either for prototyping or to create actual objects. And they were great for prototyping because if a designer, let's say designs a shoe and wants to change an element on it, they could simply change the code in the CAD file and then quickly reprint the new shoe. But for jewelry design, you can actually print actual jewelry pieces, and it's a process that takes liquid metal and then forms it into the solid design, let's say it be a ring or a necklace. When taking a close look at the Freedom of Creation dress, though, it is hard and it's a stiff material and it's practically unwearable. However, with experimentation of new materials and processes, new and huge steps have been taken in the 3D printing to really push the industry forward. The latest advancement is in Iris Van Herpen's Spring 2013 Haute Couture collection. And in this collection, she had collaborated with different companies, printing companies such as Stratasize and Materialize to create the first 3D printed garments that were actually flexible. Here we see the piece by Stratasize, and Neri Oxman explains, quote, "The incredible possibilities afforded by the new technologies allows us to reinterpret the tradition of couture as tech couture, where delicate hand embroidery and needlework is replaced by code," end quote. This dress was made using multi-material in their printing process. So here we have a video of the Iris Van Herpen dress and the process of creating it. Where you're seeing where it's actually bonding the nylon powder and cutting it layer per layer. They may then have to break apart the different powder and almost find the object, and then next they'll actually hit it with a sandblaster to get rid of all the extra particles. And what's interesting, when speaking with the gentleman who created this dress, he said that they actually still have to sew it together because there's not a 3D printer that's large enough to actually create the whole dress in one, so they created it in pieces. So you can see the flexibility of it, quite durable, very flexible. They've done tests where it can even be ran over by a car and still maintain its flexible shape. Materialize is a company, I'm going to introduce a few other companies, but Materialize is one that really works with high-end fashion designers, high-end projects and artists, not really meant for the commercial aspect of it, but really kind of working with brainstorming and the different possibilities of 3D printing. When we had spoken with the creators there, they had said the future of 3D printing really isn't necessarily in a complete 3D printed object, but creating part parts of it. So maybe if you're going to make a clutch or a bag, 3D printing that, creating the color, and then you would work with a person to create the hinges and maybe the leather straps. So the 3D printing would really just be a process in it and not the actual complete garment. So there are companies such as MakerBot, featured here, that allow the average public to experiment with 3D printing. So you can create small maquettes, you can create jewelry, and what it does is it melts down plastic and then it 3D prints your object layer per layer. So what you see here is the different plastics. You can choose the color, and you would take the CAD file, and it's pretty much a printer which you can purchase and you can have at your home, and then you can actually 3D print these objects. So these are kind of more for the everyday consumer. MakerBot is now coming out with, and they're going to release it, I think, coming up this year, where you could actually take something, let's say a ring, and it can scan the ring, a 3D object, and then it'll actually reprint the ring. So you can decide if you want it in a metal, if you want it in a nylon, if you want it in a plastic, and you can continuously duplicate rings or other 3D objects. Shapeways is another company that caters to printing and selling 3D printed objects. What they do is you create your 3D printed object, well, pretty much the CAD file, you'll send it to them, they'll actually print it for you, they'll take a small percentage and then send you the profits. And this allows people to print on an as-need basis. So if you think of the future and really printing in an eco way, this is quite viable for that. And right now they're selling different pieces, like jewelry, rings. They also have even different skulls and different things that you can sell as well. And I believe one person on it, they had sold a skull, and I think within 3 days they had made something like $30,000 because they had sold so many different skulls and the little figures. So then next we move on to the materials section, and the materials section refers to the technological advancements that have made an impact on the literal materials of the fashion objects. Here we have an early example of an aniline dye dress from circa 1860. Purple or mauve was the first synthetic dye to be discovered by Sir William Perkin while trying to find a cure for malaria. The advent of these dyes resulted in the democratization of certain colors. Previous to this, purple was a rare and expensive color reserved for royalty. The natural process of creating natural purple dye is achieved through a very, very elaborate process of extracting the mucus of a specific species of snail and applying it to the desired fiber. Synthetic dyes allow for a saturated, more fade-resistant color, and this dress right here is really a testament to the fade resistance. 150 years later, it's still very bright, very vibrant, and very purple. So next we have two dresses, a dress and a suit, and the dress on the right is made using gelatin sequins. At one point or another, I'm sure everyone has probably had Jell-O, and when you put it into your mouth, it dissolves. That's because Jell-O is a gelatin base, and when it's exposed to moisture, it does dissolve. So if you apply that theory to the sequins and the dress, if you can imagine you're in the 1920s, you're in a Prohibition club, dancing the Charleston, and you begin to perspire. And the moisture from that is getting onto the dress, and this different sequins will start to swell up and then eventually dissolve. Probably a problem most of us don't want to deal with, so they really had to come up with an alternative to that, the alternative fiber being cellophane. So cellophane being a much more stable fiber, and the suit you see on the left is made using cellophane, something that's typically used to wrap different food products like bread in. However, what the designer has done here is to cut very thin slits of cellophane film and to actually knit it together with wool to create this beautiful glistening effect. Here we have a photo of a complete cellophane dress, and it's a great fashion image because it's taken by Cecil Bean, and he actually designed the dress also for his sister when she was attending the Galaxy Ball as a shooting star. So really here you kind of see the costume aspect of a complete cellophane dress and then how it was implemented into fashion. This next suit is titled Wash and Wear Suit, and it highlights the wonderful characteristics of these synthetic materials such as nylon. For the man on the go, a nylon suit is ideal because of its ability to dry quickly and is wrinkle resistant. Here we have a video that kind of gives you an example of this type of man and his lifestyle.
Still, we've just got to take it lying down. There's nothing like a good hot bath to help unrelax and mull over problems. You don't even have to take your clothes off if you're wearing one of the latest drip dry suits. And how better to face the world fresh than after an invigorating shower? Refresh, our drip dry man in the street sets out to brave the problems of higher prices, devaluation, pay pauses, and so on.
So while this is obviously a bit of an exaggeration, you still get the idea of the wrinkle resistance, it drying quickly. A lot of people look at that video and they say, wait, what about the socks and the tie and everything else? Does that dry quickly too? So we next move on to Lycra in 1986 with the designer Mark Odabe, who introduced the first bi-stretch material. He collaborated with DuPont to create a Lycra, and what he did was he combined Lycra with everyday materials such as cotton, linens, and wools to create a very fitted garment, yet give it a beautiful elegance to it as well. If you look at most of the materials that we wear today, they are some form of a blend using a stretch fiber, and that's all thanks to Mark Odabe. The next example is what most people think of when they hear fashion and technology. Luminex is a textile that weaves together fiber optics in its designs. And a fiber optic, if you're not familiar with the construction of it, it's a very, very thin piece of glass, no thicker than a strand of hair, and it's coated in a plastic tube. When it's connected to a battery, you have this beautiful blue or white light that illuminates either a shirt or a bag. But with these different things, it also comes with a few problems. With a lot of engineers that are working with LEDs and different things, one, you have to figure out how are you going to light your object. Are you going to use a battery? If so, how long is your battery going to last? Another thing is can you wash this garment? You cannot wash this garment. Maybe you can take the battery pack out, but what happens if when you're washing it that you break a fiber, you break one of the fiber optics with the glass? You then have to completely reweave and work with new textile. So these are a lot of issues and different things that the engineers and the designers are working with when creating pieces such as this. But there is hope. They're now coming out with and creating things like flexible batteries. They're coating at these different fibers to make sure that they are wrinkle resistant, that you are able to scrunch them up and then throw them in the washing machine.